Welcome to Slight Reliability, the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Stephen Townsend. Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn about reliability and observability 1 episode at a time. Today, I am joined by Ádám, Tóth, a passionate consultant and leader specializing in performance engineering and observability. Over his career, he's had the opportunity to work with leading organizations such as EPAM, Vodafone, Dynatrace's regional partner, among others. His work has included designing observability and performance solutions, leading pre-sales and demos, and solving complex performance challenges across various industries. He's also been fortunate to share his knowledge as a speaker at events like HushDef and TestCon, and by mentoring professionals around the world. Recently, he founded Innovatech, which serves as a competency center for performance and observability, where he's building a platform to share expertise and drive innovation. Welcome, Ádám. How are you today?
Yeah, welcome, Stephen. Thank you for the introduction. I'm pretty fine at this morning or evening. And
what time is it for you?
It's 8 a.m. So actually, as I know, 12 hours between us.
Yes, 8:06 p.m. here in New Zealand. I had a question. What is a competency center?
Yeah, that's actually a quite good question, because I think there are many definitions for this, but I have my own. So I want to have a place where players like unicorns and high performance can share the knowledge and can learn from each other. This is what I have a dream as a competency center.
That's cool. I like that a lot. So we had a catch up about a week ago, and today the theme we wanted to cover was, I guess, loosely around the idea of observability maturity and what I think is your reasonably unique take on observability and what that's all about. And one of the things that you said, which really stood out to me, is that most observability conversations going on around the world are really technology heavy. They're all talking about the tools they're using and how we're getting the data, but that's only just the start, the first half of the story or half of the coin. Do you want to elaborate a bit more on your view about what mature observability looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are many different viewpoints on that. So first of all, I would call the traditional or tool perspective, like the capabilities of the different tools. So with traditional tool, you can, measure some metrics, do some analysis inside in the logs. When the new and modern observability platforms offer you wide, broader capabilities, that's one thing. But let's say the rest of the viewpoints. The next one is how the given observability and application performance tools are used in an organization. Do you have, for instance, platform engineering who can maintain that to you? Do you have some observability team or monitoring team, or you have the silos, and not just the data silos, but the teams, like how they use it? So I did quite a few assessments related to observability and performance in the last couple of years, and I faced this challenge okay, team A use, monitoring platform A and B, while team B use an observability platform for everything. So how can you merge this knowledge and tool capabilities together? So it's like another one. And I was thinking a lot, and I think one of the biggest challenges, what is really observability? Because you start with the traditional monitoring, so application performance and so on, and you just have the shift to observability, which is telling you everything inside in your code, inside in your infrastructure, and so on. So for me, it's a fully different capabilities. We can talk about differently, application performance monitoring maturity and observability maturity as a separate thing. I'm not sure. I'm just thinking loudly. So yeah, these are the main challenges, and it will lend us to the next point. Even you can sometimes build business or capabilities on the data that you have. Is it part of the journey, like observability maturity, or is it some kind of observability platform maturity, or like data engineering maturity, or what? So might you can use the data to understand better how your production users behave, and might you can improve the regression testing. Actually, we did it a few times, but I don't know, is it part of the maturity journey or it's a different thing?
So what you just said, I think is interesting. And I have seen elements of this in the past. When we think of observability, we think of end customers. We think of, we have a business and we provide some service to actual customers, and we need to observe the solution and how those customers are behaving or what their experience is. That's cool. We don't often think about other things such as, just like you said, test automation, observing, are we doing a good job of our testing and test automation? Or are some other business processes working well and as intended? I think that absolutely should be part of observability, but we don't really talk about it very much. I wonder why that. Why do you think observability is so focused towards end customer business activities and technology?
Yeah, so at the moment, I think it's changing. So I've seen some other conference speakings and like introductions, some tools or new capabilities. So we can talk about developer observability right now, or even pipeline observability. So there are many, I'm just saying, there are many other examples when observability is introduced in your capabilities, in your development or testing capabilities. So it's already there. And there are other areas where observability traditionally used to understand how the end clients behave. So what was what happened in the peak hours, what happened to a given client. So that's the traditional thinking of the observability. And for me, which is the challenge when we try to look the traditional observability maturity journey, is how it's connected to the application performance monitoring. And I see some logical gap, because the application performance monitoring focuses on the performance, while observability focuses on some kind of deeper understanding. So I understand, like, when you have the performance monitoring, you have the transactional data there, and observability use the transactional data to have the deep understanding.
I think that's a fascinating area of inquiry and something I haven't really spent enough time on. Observing how tools are being used in your org, improving test coverage, observing things that matter to developers, observing pipelines, especially if pipelines, we talk about pipelines in the CI/CD thing we build in a tool, but I've always been interested in the idea of monitoring that socio-technical pipeline of how we get features from a developer's laptop into production and everything in between that, and observing that process, because that is such a challenge to get that thing humming in a really complex organization. And I think it's just really interesting. It's a good way of putting it. Something else you were talking about is that we spend so much energy in the observability space talking about getting the data. How, from your experience, how effective are organizations being at using that data to get genuine insight that improves their business, their customers, or anything?
That's a tough question. First of all, I remember one of my mentors said that always start conversation, like answering such question, it depends. And really, that's the answer.
Yeah.
That's the answer. So I saw organizations and companies who can use their observability data quite well. So understanding how clients behave, understanding the for us, and not just that, but much more. Where are the customers located? How can they improve their campaigns? So like marketing campaigns. So that's one part of the story. Why I saw other customers who have the data already, but doing actually nothing with it. So even not trying. They have, but not trying. And I think the problem is that they don't know that they can do. So somehow we need to open the eyes, but it's not that easy. Yeah, that was one of the root causes.
I also think that even if we're trying to use our observability data to infer something about our business or our customers, that can be really muddy water, and it borders on the world of psychology and sociology. Like, for example, I work in insurance, and a pretty common use case is getting an insurance quote from a website. And you might be monitoring or observing a bunch of information about what customers are doing and how long things are taking. And you might see that there's a big drop-off rate at a certain step. Oh, and that step has got slower. And you got there's correlation there, but not necessarily causation. It might be a big drop-off because it's one of our competitors has just released an amazing, much cheaper product. I think it's very hard sometimes to use the data and be like confident that you understand everything that's going on. It's easier to think that using any data, observability data and reporting data, is an exact science. But I think it's too complicated to be an exact science.
Yeah, it's not. It's definitely not. Just one story came to my mind when we released the product, and I was there as a kind of an SRE or performance engineer, and I needed. My responsibility was just to cross-check like the product went smoothly, and we didn't face any problems. So like typical activities, and they asked me like, okay, how many users do we have? And we didn't have, let's say, users, or like really less amount of users than expected. So we built a product, took a lot of months, and there were no users. That was the plan, was to use it internally inside the customer. So sometimes observability can highlight these, let's say, unexpected things. So
going back to this idea of observability maturity, we were talking about that there might be some prerequisites for having mature observability. For example, we were talking about, does a company have service level objectives or service level agreements in place? And if we don't have those, then that will maybe limit the effectiveness of observability. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, SLOs and SLAs should be part of the maturity journey. And again, a bit like, for me, SLO and SLA should be part of. So if we divide observability to two places, one part of the observability is related to the performance monitoring, let's say, or the performance world, and the other part of the observability is related to how the data is used in the observability platforms. The SLA world related to the performance maturity of the observability. And definitely it's part of the journey. So when you define what is wrong, what are the expectations, you can become even better. But for me, SLO and SLA makes sense in the world. So like you are having a measurable something. So I'm not saying the observability going to be more efficient, because like your system's going to be more efficient and observability just helping you.
I think this might be somewhat controversial, but I believe I've seen organizational sort of socio-technical situations where service level objectives aren't particularly helpful yet. We're not quite at the point where that would be the right thing to do at that time. But I do think that if you're going to set up observability, as you said when we talked last time, you have to know, what are you trying to achieve with that? What are your requirements? What is it that you're setting this up for? Because if you just go set the thing up, you're just going to pay a bunch of money for a thing collecting a heap of data and do nothing with it.
Yeah, there are many great metrics out there to measure. If we take the traditional approach, I think the availability and the response time are the two most important SLO, and definitely the availability is the harder one to achieve. I remember a couple of years ago, we needed to achieve 99.9% for availability, and of course not counting the maintenance windows. And they decided to improve it from 99.9 to 99.95. It was not really feasible. Even the first one was really hard to achieve and took a while. I don't know, but sometimes I feel when someone is trying to decide from just improving that small tick number, doesn't really know how hard to achieve it.
Yeah, you've also opened up a can of worms there with availability. That's such a difficult thing and so contextual to capture. I've been in situations where we were looking at, well, first of all, uptime as a measure. It was up this many hours of the day isn't a particularly good measure because sometimes the day are busier than others, so the impact of an outage is higher. And the other thing is, like, where are you capturing that? Because let's say you've got a web application, you might be saying, let's capture a web server at the web server, like the point that the requests hit our server side, let's capture the success rate at that point. But then you've got to define what success is, because it could be different kinds of errors, but also anything that takes longer than 2 seconds, we'll call that a failure as well. And then it's like, well, you might have a situation where the availability from the sort of server side is, I don't know, 99.95, as you said. But it turns out that there's an issue with our JavaScript code in the browser, and it's causing failures, and the actual customer experience availability is about 80%. There's just so many things to think about with availability. It just every time I think about it, it's like, you've really got to think about what you want to get out of it.
Yeah, and when it comes to availability, based on my experience, what was really working is the synthetic monitoring and simulating real users. So when they are, what you just shared, when the rendering is in the picture, so not just calling the API calls and so on, but actually open the browser, just clicking on the browser on the different things. So like actually simulating the users. And why the synthetic is, I'm not saying better, but must be in place for the availability. If you want to really depend on the users you have, the real users, if you don't have real users, you don't know whether your availability is there or not. But if you have the synthetic, you always see that measure.
A lot of my job at the moment is about observing test environments, non-production environments. And there's long periods of time when no one is using them. But I still want to know if they break. So how am I going to do that without synthetics? But then again, the downside of synthetics is the sample size is very low. And so sometimes weird things happen, and you might go, it's down, but it was one request that failed. And it's the other thing. Yeah, the mass behind it. Yeah.
Yeah. And the tricky thing is when you don't have actually user interface. So I don't know why, but your application includes just the services, and you still want to see the availability. I also faced that test environment issues. We created some tools that was pinging each of the services using SOAP or REST or something like that, and checking the business logic inside. So that was also working. But let's say the only thing is that if you have the UI, you need to include it, because alone this part it doesn't really make sense.
And for everyone listening, I am doing an interview episode about synthetic monitoring very soon. So that'll be a good topic to cover. Okay, so you, I think, have an interesting take on observability, and you started exploring this idea of a new model for observability maturity. It's not about logs, metrics, and traces. It goes well beyond that. What can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was thinking, like, we observe the traces, logs, metrics, and so on, but how do we observe whether the client faces any issues? Normally, we try to look at the client's browser, whether he faces a challenge, they face a challenge or not. But I think that's not the whole story. So what happens really? Might the client start some not good comment on your Facebook, on the company's Facebook side, or you are receiving so many app ratings, lower than 2, of course. And that's the real story of customer experience, because they somehow try to share their opinion about your company, your product, or anything. And that's just the limitations of my knowledge. But as I say, it's not part of the observability story. But this is the thing that we should capture if we really want to know how the clients and customers feel about and to see their pain, because this is not really captured at the moment.
I would be curious to know if anyone out there is monitoring and visualizing in some way social media sentiment and app ratings, because that is absolutely, you're getting direct feedback from your customers. How is that not valuable information? And it can be real time these days, right? Especially social media. People complain in the moment and you can respond to it quickly.
I'm just thinking there are some silos, and so some organizations should capture it somehow, but these are just not part of the observability platforms, or they are part, but I don't know any of them. But I remember, and it was not recently, it was like 6 or 7 years ago, or even more, when we were doing some mobile app development and there were some performance problem, and the business asked us to check which comments do we receive. Are there any problems? Obviously not me, but some people from the team. And this memory just came to my mind, I don't know, a couple of months ago, like, we're still not capturing that.
Something else you mentioned, and it reminds me a little bit of the interview I did with Martin Thwaites a long time ago about developer observability during development, which is interesting, is I think a level of maturity is, are you using your observability just reactively to help triage and investigate incidents? Or are you proactively using it to build better products and services? And then another way of putting it, which I think I took from you, is your observability a value add or a cost center? I think it really rings true for me in the terms of the level of maturity for observability. I don't think there's many organizations who are using it proactively and think of it as a value add. Have you seen that? Have you seen organizations who treat observability as a value add?
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I have been doing that for a long time, and I cannot name them, of course, but I saw few examples. One example, and it was long back, so just the communication itself helped to improve the maturity. So before releasing some new version, the business just went to the operation teams and just asked, okay, we are going to release something. Please help us to monitor the production proactively and ping us if something happens, because we can stop the marketing campaign anytime. So just the communication between the different parties to improve the maturity itself. And I see at many organizations who face problems with the maturity, or might any other maturity, the communication is the biggest issue. So it's not technology related in many cases. Of course, you need some tools in the house, but other than the tools, it's like how the different organization inside in the company can work together, can support each other, can think as their job to help to the company, not the organization, to the company. And that was one of the main differences when I saw companies using the observability data. So they had proper communication between the different parties. So one other example, when we used the logs and traces to improve regression testing and loop back the information to the business, there was proper communication between development, testing, operation, SRE, business analyst, and project management. So we knew each other, we knew how to communicate, and that was the main thing, to have that communication. That's the real issue for companies who are not mature enough in the observability. What I've seen, but Of course, there are many other things like data silos and you don't have the proper tools. I'm saying companies who have the proper tools and have proper people, but they don't know each other inside in the company.
Yeah, I think I'm going to paraphrase you here. I think it's if your observability isn't connected to the real user in some way, and if it doesn't help you understand the experience of the user, if it doesn't help you understand something about your business, and that all the stakeholders invested in that aren't using it, then that shows a lack of maturity. And I have seen situations where there's literally an observability person, and that person is the one who does observability, which of course doesn't make any sense to say that, and they're the only person who has access to the tooling, who looks at the data, and that for me is just the ultimate wasted opportunity.
Yeah, he's a single source of failure in the observability, actually, that person. So I used to be that person sometimes. And I always try to share knowledge, like how others can use the tools. And I don't know, might this landed me in the conception of that competency center, which is built on the knowledge sharing, because I've seen that was the key to share with others how they can use it, how they can use the data. So how can they think in non-functional requirements to adopt them in their particular role? Of course, I'm still learning. But that's a continuous journey.
You actually already touched on this, but my last main question is actually your question, which is there an intersect between observability and data science and data reporting? What do you think? Is there an opportunity to start? Are they becoming the same thing, or are they still discrete things we keep in their own boxes?
Yeah, it's tough one. To be honest, I'm not an expert of the data science, so I'm not the best to answer many of the parts related to that. But what I see is that when we talk about like traditional observability, which is using the traces, logs, and so on, you are getting a lot of data there. So many observability platforms has their own data lake house. This is how it's called, might be. I think that the infrastructure and the know-how and the data from the observability side is prepared. So it's there. It's just a vision, but when the big players in the data field see that really data is gold, so they start using it somehow. So I think there are many opportunities to know better about like cost optimization or improve the user rating or the digital experience. There are much more in there. And as we move and we have the age of AI with the data science, they can do much more and more thing on the transactional data.
Makes sense to bring these things together, yeah. All right, we've almost run out of time. And I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about observability and your view of observability maturity, which is, I think, very much on brand for this podcast and the way that I think about things. What's next for you? Are you speaking at any events in the near future? Or?
First of all, thank you, Stephen. It was a pleasure to be here, and I really love these more philosophical discussions about the technology things and challenges than the technology itself. So as my company is quite new, we just started the services 1 month ago. I have full of pain with compliance and agreements. So just in the next couple of weeks and months, we might having some more contracts and we need to deliver, of course. But I plan to create some trainings and educational knowledge, perhaps until the summer, but probably more during the summer. But I really want to deliver 1 to 5 days trainings about consultancy, observability, performance, and things like that. This is the main plan. And this is the main concept of my entire startup, let's say.
Thanks again, Ádám, for coming on the show. It's awesome to have you. And I really I enjoyed, as you said, the philosophical discussion about observability. Also, for those who are into the more philosophical side of the stuff we talk about, look into resilience engineering. That is I think that's the thing which I'm going to be looking into in the near future. And there's a podcast called This Is Fine. This Is Fine Pod. It's great. Checked it out. But everyone else at home, I hope you will have a good week or so before I'm back, and I'll see you all next time.